Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. My name is Kalika and this is day 7 of Revenge Week 2.0. So you're gonna be pure capsaicin levels of spicy after watching this video. Also, the giveaway is now over and I will announce the winners in the video's description. Congratulations to all of you and please check your email so I can get your chocolate to you as soon as possible. Also, I now have a Patreon, so if anyone wants to support me directly, now you can. There's also some cool perks if you want to check it out. Link is also in the description. Finally, a disclaimer. This is BlackholeRevenge, so includes serious crimes. If this is something that makes you uncomfortable, then please don't watch this. So, without further ado, let's go. Abused wife and mother watches husband die. Throwaway account for obvious reasons. New user, no abbreviations. This happened in the late 90s, so enough time has elapsed to safely disclose. I had a friend back then who'd been widowed for 4 years. She told me her story of victimization at the hands of her abusive and violent husband. She was mid-20s when her husband died. She was married to a man 20 years her senior. They married when she was still a teenager, and they had a 5-year-old son when her husband died. Her husband was an abusive and violent man who kept tight control over her and the boy. Though he never physically abused the child, he was emotionally abusive and very threatening towards their son. He saved the physical violence for his wife alone. During their marriage, she had been savagely beaten many times. She had permanent scars on her body and had been hospitalized several times with broken bones and other serious injuries. She was in fear of her life every day. She was so controlled she was a slave in her own home, fearful of ever stepping out of line. One form of control was to always know where she was at any given moment, and if she ever had to leave the house to shop or run errands, she would be timed. She was given a time frame to be back in the house, and if she was even just 1 minute late, she would be severely beaten. Her husband was a licensed gun owner who owned a legal rifle and ammunition as he enjoyed hunting, and he would take that rifle, hold it to her head, and tell her that if she ever attempted to leave him, he would hunt her down and kill both her and their son. As well as the beatings, he would sometimes take the rifle, hold it to her head and pull the trigger. It was unloaded, but that did not diminish the terror she experienced each time, she told me. She said that she left in no doubt at all that if she ever ran, he would find them and kill them both. Another weapon he used against her was to threaten suicide if she ever left. Many abusers use the manipulation tool of threatening suicide or self-harm to keep their victims tethered to them. When abusers threaten suicide or self-harm, they are causing the fear to rise within victims so that they don't leave. In this way, threats of suicide are being used as a method of control. It's an incredibly common manipulation tactic used by people with borderline personality disorder, among other issues. Her husband did have dangerous medication in the house. I don't know what it was, and he would handle his bottle of pills whenever he issued a suicide threat. One day, she had to leave the house to shop for food. On the way back, she was caught in traffic that delayed her return to the house within the time frame she had been given. She said the fear and panic was intense because she knew she would return to another serious beating. She said it felt like her insides were being ripped out of her body as she pulled into the driveway 10 minutes late. She said she walked into the house in a blind state of panic, anticipating the beating, when she saw him. He was motionless on the couch, with an open bottle of pills on the floor beside him. She said she stood there and looked at him with a million thoughts of panic running through her head. Then she made her decision. She went to the other couch and sat down and looked at him, and she said at that moment her heart was pounding in her chest. She knew what he had done. He had done it once before. She was supposed to walk in and find him breathing but unconscious and in a state of panic call an ambulance for him, just like last time. But this time she was 10 minutes late home. Last time she got him help in time, but this time she just looked at him. He wasn't breathing. No rise and fall of his chest. She said she looked at the clock on the wall and sat there looking at him, overcoming the panic and emotions, and stayed sitting there till 10 minutes had passed, till she knew he could not be resuscitated, and only then did she walk to the phone and make the call. She said the emergency services and police saw her obvious distress, the crying, the panic, the breakdown, and assumed it was a wife in distress at losing her husband. They didn't know they were watching someone who had just been rescued, someone who was at last free. The authorities did not doubt suicide, as it was on record that he had tried it once before. This is the story of how one abused young wife and mother finally became free. 10 years ago, I murdered my grandmother and I have been celebrating it with my family. Deleted r/confession post. This is not mine. It was originally posted by Throwaway Happiness 10. I saw it several days ago and just remembered it. I had to find an archived copy since the post was deleted. I'm not sure if it's a troll or not, but erring on the side of karma whoring, this is one hell of a story. Never been good at writing essays, so I'm just gonna jump right into it. I am now the only child from my parents, but this wasn't always the case. My dad is a spineless cuck that is dominated by my ruthless mother. When I was around 2 years old and living in Sweden, my dad went on a trip to Syria to visit my grandmother that used to live there, the one I murdered, and stayed with her for 1 year because she had a tumour and had to get a few operations. During this year, he was a regular to a prostitute he fancied. Eventually, he got her pregnant. After giving birth, she came to my grandmother's house and just dumped her daughter on him and left. She ghosted him and he could not find her anymore. My grandmother called my mother and all hell broke loose. My mother ordered him to throw my sister in the dumpster and pretend she was not alive because she was filth. My dad was very close to doing this, but somehow what's left of his fatherlyhood woke up for a second and he didn't throw my sister away. He instead convinced my grandmother to keep her and eventually she will take care of her when she grew up, technically just having her as a servant. This was the most humane solution he could come up with. When I eventually grew up, I met my sister when I was visiting my grandmother and we got really close. She even looked a lot like me, so I had no doubt she was my sister. But the way she was living was just awful. It broke my heart seeing how underfed she was. Her clothes were one rip away from being rags and she was not allowed to use my grandmother's combs and stuff to fix her hair. I would collect any money I got and send it her way, but my grandmother eventually found out and started taking them for herself. She was never allowed to go to school and could only see a doctor when she became seriously ill. By the time she reached 14 years old, she admitted to me that she was thinking about killing herself because she could not see any future for herself. My dad would just marry her to some crap family as soon as my grandmother died, and she would be more like a commodity to be traded. On the 13th of June 2008, my sister had a fight with my grandmother and was holding a little can of gasoline and saying that she was going to burn herself. My grandmother laughed and dared her to do it, which my sister did. My sister lived and died miserably. At first my parents told me it was an accident, but I overheard them talking about what happened in detail. By this point, my dad did not even care. I was very disgusted with him and my mother. I dreamt a lot about just jumping on them and biting their effing throats off and just watched them bleed in horror as I kicked their faces in. I wanted to hold his jaw from the inside with my hands and just rip it from his face. I eventually brooded and started going over the events. 3 guilty people, and I was planning on killing them all, as violently as possible. I could never come up with a plan regarding my parents, but I was already done with how to end my grandmother, the filth who made life miserable for my sister. On December 2008, I booked a ticket to visit my grandmother and was supposed to return before New Year to celebrate with my friends. I told my parents that my friend is picking me up from the airport and I'm going to stay with him for a few days before coming back. I then called my friend and told him that I'm going to bang a girl that I met and if my parents ever ask him about me, he would have to cover for me. Him being oblivious to what I was actually doing agreed. I flew to Syria, stayed with my grandmother for about 2 weeks, and when the day of my flight came, I packed my bags and told her that I'm going to the airport. With disgust, I kissed her goodbye, and then made as much noise as possible with my bags to make sure that the nosy neighbours saw me leave for the airport. I even called a taxi driver that lived nearby and he took me directly to the airport. I made sure he saw me get into the airport. I then stood at the check-in and took a selfie. I didn't check in. I turned around and walked out. I took a cab to a nearby hotel and dropped my bag off in the room. I changed my clothes and then took a cab back to my grandmother's apartment. It was 2 at night and I was very quiet when I got up the stairs. I knocked on her door and she opened when she saw me through the hole. She was surprised to see me and was wondering about the flight. I told her it was delayed for a few hours, so I left the bags at the check-in with the employees. She was tired, so she decided to make us some tea while I waited. As soon as she got up, I stood in front of her. She had this very confused look on her face due to my sudden reaction. I had not planned how to exactly do it, but I knew this is as good as it gets. Really quickly, I held her neck with my hands. My thumbs pressed on her throat very hard in case she tried to scream. She instantly got a horrified look on her face and I just got really angry. She tried to speak, but couldn't make a single sound. At first she tried hitting me, but my arms were longer than hers and she couldn't reach me. When I started applying pressure, she tried to scratch my arms instead. But I was wearing a thick sweater and also I was being pumped with adrenaline. When I saw her struggling, I became very angry. I was grinding my teeth so hard I almost broke them. I told her this is for my sister. I kept repeating my sister's name in a quiet, angry tone, but she couldn't hear me. She was panicking and her only concern was getting air. She then kind of just froze there. I kept squeezing even though she didn't move. I really wanted to make sure. I finally let go after a while. My hands were cramped from all that tension and listened for a heartbeat. I sat then on the sofa, took a few breaths, and choked her again real hard for around 10 minutes. When I was sure she was dead, I started opening every drawer she had until I finally found her gold and money. I put them in a small bag and left. I closed the door behind me in case a neighbour found her too early. I walked for maybe a whole hour while my hands were shaking as crazy, until I was finally far away. I threw the bag with the money and gold in a small trash bucket that people had in front of their house. I went and took a taxi to the hotel, and I remembered my sister and cried. I remembered my grandmother's face and I calmed down. I felt complete, like when a daunting task was finally over. A very soothing relief. That night, I slept like an effing baby. I woke up the next morning and brought breakfast and booked a ticket back to Sweden the same day. I turned the TV on and put on some music. For the first time after my sister's death, I was happy. When I came back to Sweden, I took the bus back from the airport and later took the train to my friend's house. Told him that the girl dumped me and I was instead celebrating with him. My dad calls me 2 days later and informs me that my grandmother was robbed and that the thief stole her valuables and killed her when she saw him. No one suspected a thing. I acted surprised and made my way back. For a few months I acted sad and secretly watched my family in case someone got a wild theory. But they all seemed to believe the robbery part since it's not that uncommon. The closest someone got was my uncle when he mentioned how unfortunate it was that I left the day before this and that I could have saved her. My mother called it lucky because I maybe would have also gotten killed. I pretended to be sad about it. Now every year my dad makes a ceremony to kind of remember my grandmother. They make dinner for family and friends and hope that prayers reach her. They don't effing know that this is a time for celebration for me. I am now married and I have 3 kids. The plan of killing my parents is cancelled due to them effing themselves over so bad that it's more of a punishment if they stay alive. They are also not allowed near my children, as a punishment to how they treated my sister. Every year I celebrate this by buying gifts to my wife and kids. My wife wondered why I did this, and I simply said that the way my grandmother passed made me realise how suddenly loved ones can disappear, and how this is my way of saying I love you. This became long enough, and I apologise for the many grammatical errors you will find. This kind of reads between revenge and no sleep. When he said he slept like a baby afterwards, I got chills. What do you think of this story? Do you think it was justified, or should they have gone down the legal road to get justice for his sister? Leave me a comment down below, I'm really interested. Okay, so that's all for r/BlackholeRevenge. I really hope you did enjoy this one. As always, if you do want to see more content like this, then please do subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!